This may be your first experience of Holy Communion, or it may be one of a long litany of experiences, either in the United Church or in some other denomination. If you have had experience of communion, chances are you've experienced it in different ways at different ages, and perhaps you've reflected on what it means or doesn't mean to you. I invite you today on Worldwide Communion Sunday to think about what communion, Holy Communion, one of two sacraments in the United Church of Canada besides baptism, what does this experience mean to you? When I was confirmed as a United Church member at the age of 13, I remember my very first experience of communion. I remember sitting in the back of the church with my mother and my grandmother, and at a certain point in the service, toward the end of the service, a whole series of men in blue suits, that's important, blue, I guess. I say that only because they all wore blue suits, and they all got up, and my grandmother, who was the first female elder in the church. So there was my grandmother in her hat, and her long white gloves, and her dress, and 11 men in blue suits, all in the back, and the minister. And I remember that we sang, "Hear, O my Lord, I see thee face." Did you know that one? Yes. Yeah, and at that point, yes, half the church left. They just cleared it. And I remember thinking, what's going on? Why is everybody leaving? And my mother sort of tugged at my shoulder, because my grandmother was up there, and my mom and I moved quite close to the front, yes, and there was a lot of room up there, and everybody else left, yes. And at that point, the elders would take communion, which was the cubes of bread and the small glass cups of grape juice, and they would serve us, yes. And I remember asking my mother on the way home, why did everybody leave? And she said, well, they weren't members of the church. And I said, oh, okay, but what was that all about then? And she said, well, it's for people who are members. And I said, why? And my mom said, because that's the way it is. You ever have those conversations? And I remember when my very first church in Donkin, when I was in Cape Breton, we were discussing the possibility of children taking communion, right? That was on the session docket. And I remember someone saying to me, like, we can't have children take communion because they don't understand what they're doing. And I'm a new minister, so, you know, I can ask questions. I said, well, how many people do you think in our church know what they're doing? And I said, moreover, as I looked around the session, how about right now we go around the room and we answer the question, what is communion to you? And one person would have said, so you just graduated from seminary? I said, yes. Why don't you give us the answer? and they took out their pen. And they were ready. Because whatever I said, that was likely going to be their answer. As I say, if there was a test about whether or not you understood what was happening, I don't know how many of us would pass, right? And at the end of the day, when the whole experience is over and you're driving home or walking home, right? And you're thinking about the service, what is it about the communion experience that means something to you? Now, in a very short way, and you can read lots of books. I took courses on this, believe it or not. There are a number of different interpretations as to what the experience of communion is, right? So the obvious one, let's start at the beginning, is that it's a reflection of Jesus sharing with his early disciples his sacrifice, right? The notion that the bread represents his body and the wine or the grape juice represents his blood is a clear reference to the fact that Jesus will be dead soon. He will die. He will die on the cross. And there is an understanding that in receiving this meal, this sacrament, that we are understanding what Jesus has done and the necessity of that and how important his sacrifice is to our own discipleship. What it means to be a Christian, because it costs to be a Christian. There is something about living this life that is difficult and hard and costly. And the great martyrs of our faith are people who have put their life on the line, put their faith into action, and therefore we accept that when we receive communion. So that's one. There is another way in which people receive the sacrament. And of course, when Jesus was in the upper room with his disciples, there was a clear sense in that meal that he was, in sharing that meal in an intimate way, he was inviting them into his life of discipleship. So in the early church, in that particular context, where you sat at a table and with whom meant everything. And we don't think about this now because when we eat, right, we sit down and we shove the food into our mouth as fast as possible and move on. But in that context, who you ate with and where you ate meant everything. And so meals, if you go back and you read the 4 Gospels, meals figure hugely in the life of Jesus. Yes? So when he talks to the host, he says, the most important thing to do as a host is whom you invite. Yes? Hospitality. Making people feel welcome. Finding people around the table. Crucial. And so when Jesus brings his disciples and they share that meal, there's an intimacy, there's a sense of community, and in the book of Acts, which comes right after John, there's a notion that the Christian community in its earliest form, when they gathered together, they would share an abundant meal, big meal, like our potlucks, yes? And they would have this big meal, and then they would share in this meal that we call communion. And it was a clear reference that the meal that brought people together as a community in support of one another, in care of one another, to strengthen one another, was part and parcel of being a believer. So the other part of being in communion, as it were, is not just the remembering of the sacrifice, it is also the strengthening of community, of being together, of being knit together as a body. That's important too. And most of the people who I meet with, and they do have an answer to the question, what is communion? Yes? Will reference some part of that spectrum of the sacrifice or the notion of community and of being connected. Those aspects are very, very important. And so it begs the question, right? If we divide communion between us and them, how are we us? Yes? You see what I mean? There's something very strange about having a gathering of Christians to remember Jesus and his stories and his life and his death and his resurrection, and then have half the people walk out the door. Now sometimes people have accused me of being not quite appreciative of details. Have Have you ever heard that? And my experience of that is that sometimes when we're preparing communion, and we do a great job, we have a great team of people who prepare communion, God bless all of them. But sometimes we can focus so much, right, on the details of the communion service that we miss the purpose of the communion service. So, when I ask people, how was communion? We didn't miss anything. Well, that's good. I like that. Or the bread was all just so. Or we collected up all the glasses and we counted them and we got them all right. Okay. My sense is, do we ask ourselves when we have communion, was there a sense in the service that we were together, that we felt the presence? The reading that Zenora read to us references 2 Timothy, and it's the notion of who is a believer. And the idea is, in that letter, that Timothy has found faith from his mother and his grandmother, and their name. So on this worldwide communion service, as you think about the sacrifice of Jesus and the community of believers, consider also those who are not in this room, but who have brought you to faith. Consider at this table that it is not just the people in this room, but the mystical communion of all believers. Right? Remember Lord Findlay, who would be up there with Lucy and Glenn. Right? Remember Lord, right? And keep his mind. Yeah. Remember Grace Vignon, who would be furiously at home making sure she had all of the crafts ready for the fall fair. Remember Grace. And remember all of those people whom we have lost to death for their example, for their discipleship, for the fact that they lived lives of sacrifice and community and brought us together and showed us how to be. In my life as a minister, the couple I always remember are Clyde and Joan Hill. They were elders I had at Fairview United Church. Clyde died just a few years ago, and I have the document that they give out at the funeral home. And what I always remember about Clyde and Joan is that they were elders in the church. Clyde was legally blind, although he could see some things. And they did not have a car license. And they would walk up and down Bears Road with their bags, ready to serve communion to all of the persons who could not get out to church. And they would bring news back of everyone they visited. And they would, and that was hard for them because they didn't have a car and they used either the bus or walking. And whenever they would visit people, they would remember all the information. They would bring it back to us, and we would share it at session meetings. And I just always remember these two as persons who took the notion of sacrifice and community so honestly and so authentically. And I remember him. So every time we share communion, Clyde is in the room. He's part of the mystical communion. And I wonder who is in your room? Who is next to you in the pew? Who do you feel the mystical presence of in this gathering? Consider as we share today in the bread and the wine and the sacrament of Jesus. Consider whom has demonstrated in real life, as this letter was shared by Zenora, who has been that, like Timothy's grandmother and mother, your elder, your mentor, the person